So, good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Dominique Gilliard, and I am the Director of Racial Righteousness and Reconciliation for the Evangelical Covenant Church. And today I have the privilege of interviewing Dr. Jennifer Lee Koh, who is an immigration legal specialist and is serving as a visiting professor right now at the University of California, Irvine. And so Dr. Koh and I are going to have a conversation about our immigration system and kind of some of the implications it has for us right now in this season of COVID. Welcome, Jennifer. How you doing?
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. And please do call me Jennifer.
All right. And so, Jennifer, when I first engaged you, had the privilege of hearing from you at the Christian Community Development Conference's national conference, and you really put a prophetic call out to the church in regards to our responsibility to welcome the foreigner amongst us and to really stand up and advocate for a more just and equitable immigration system and reform that's needed. So today, we just want to kind of pick up on some of that conversation and share it with a broader constituency. And just have my first question is kind of, can you talk to us about our broken immigration system and why is it broken and kind of what would it look like to think about fixing it?
Yeah. So thanks for the question. I think these days and in the past couple of years, it's been hard for people to not just take a look at the news and take the news and see immigration news and have some kind of emotional reaction, right? Seeing images of small children being pulled out of their parents' arms, seeing people in cages, seeing people who are telling their stories, fleeing just violence and persecution. Other days we might open up the newspaper and hear stories of families who are already here being ripped apart and parents being put into detention centers, cities trying to develop new policies. We hear about young people who have had DACA, who are working, many of whom are working as healthcare professionals, as doctors and nurses on the battlefront of COVID-19, who are just waiting to see what the Supreme Court has to say with respect to the DACA decisions. There's some kind of reaction that many of us have. And many that people have expressed to me over the past couple of years, how could this be? How could we be doing this? For those of us who have been working in the immigration system or who have been studying the system for some time, the sad reality is that as horrifying and shocking as some of the developments have been, in other ways, they've not been that surprising at all. And that's been a result of a couple of different trends and forces that I'll just touch upon. So one is that for centuries, we have a system, we have a constitution, we have courts that are meant to enforce that constitution. For centuries, the courts have taken a somewhat hands-off approach with respect to immigration laws. And so if we look back in history, we had things like the Chinese Exclusion Act, where our government passed really quite explicitly racist laws and said, look, we're going to blame Chinese immigrants for sort of having an economic impact or sort of destroying our national fabric. And so we're going to say no immigration from China. And the courts saw that law and they said, you know what, we're not going to declare it to be unconstitutional. We're just not going to look at it at all. That's one thing. And then the other thing is that there's a lot of political stalemate. No one seems to be able to agree. So, for example, the reason we have DACA is because Congress couldn't pass some more meaningful law to make it possible even for people who came as young children to the United States to get immigration papers. And the result of all of this, even before our current political climate, is that the president, whoever has been elected president, actually has a lot of control over immigration policy. I mean, in general, POTUS, the president of the United States, is typically viewed as the most powerful person in the world. But even compared to many other areas of life um, and law, when it comes to immigration, the president has had particular power, sort of more power compared to other areas. And that, it doesn't take away from the fact that there have been problems with the system, that there have been real areas where the law has needed some reform and needed updating. But when there's a president who's rational, who's compassionate, who's humane, that wants to take into consideration different interests, then it's less of a concern. If you have a president who's single-mindedly devoted to demonizing immigrants, to radicalizing the entire system, trying to increase human suffering, trying to attack immigrants, regardless of whether they're categorized as legal or undocumented, then that's really a recipe for just an all-out human rights disaster. And I do believe that's where we're at. We're at a place of disaster that is also a place for mourning, but also a place for imagination, right? For those of us who can long for and envision a better kind of world, then it's a good time to ask ourselves both how did we get here, who signed off on that, and how can we think about a different type of future with different priorities.
So Jennifer, I know right now we're in a very crucial moment for DACA and the question of DACA. Can you explain a little bit about what's going on right now with that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, basically, the Supreme Court is set to issue its decision any day now. And the decision has to do with whether the current administration's decision to cancel DACA, whether that was done in a lawful manner. It essentially has to do with a doctrine that in part says that if the government gives a reason for doing something and cites a legal reason for doing something, then the government actually has to be right on the law, right? The government can't say this is the legal reason and actually get the law wrong.
Yeah.
That's at the heart of what's going on with the DACA case. If in the best case scenario, if the Supreme Court decides that the government's attempt to eliminate DACA was not lawful, then all it means is that people who have DACA now, that it can't be taken away from them, and may provide opportunities for people to apply. But really, in the worst case scenario, the absolute worst case scenario is the Supreme Court could say, look, the decision to eliminate DACA was lawful, it's fine. All those thousands of young people who are working in different fields could be at risk of deportation, could lose their work authorization, just a huge swath of our society, and people who have come to know only the United States as their home could find themselves at risk, not just of deportation, but also of detention as well. So there's a lot riding on this decision. Part of also how things shake out will depend on how what we see politically happening in terms of national leadership in the year to come.
Yeah, so that's something that would have a profound impact on our country. And I think sometimes people who aren't abreast to immigration legislation and kind of the implications for certain policies might not really understand the depth in which that would transform America.